Hello, and welcome to my digital composition recital. Due to the situation with COVID-19, I was unable to do an in-person recital with all of my ensembles and performers because there were so many people involved, we couldn't make it work. So instead, I'm going to do this digital recital here, where I'm going to take you through a journey of some of the pieces that would have been on my recital, but also kind of a history lesson of my composition practice throughout my undergraduate degree. So let's get started. The first piece I want to talk about is a piece called Thracian Fanfare. I wrote this piece for the concert that we are going to have the first semester of my composition lessons. It's for trumpet, bass trombone, and snare drum. And the truth be told, the snare drum was only added to help the players keep time, but I think it worked out quite well. This piece that you are listening to currently has a MIDI realization version going on and not a live recording because the live recording didn't go super well. The reason I'm deciding to mention this piece is specifically because it's the first piece I ever had performed on a stage. And this piece was intended to be a fanfare to open up the whole concert. This is also one of the works that started my cover page idea. I began by using clip art instead of photography because of copyright issues, and then I kind of kept the thing going on through the series of undergraduate works so that I would have some consistency and separation between them and my future works. So you'll see throughout this video all the different cover pages that I did, and I generally kept it with one or two colors and very simple art ideas on them. The next piece I want to talk about was actually on the same concert as Thracian Fanfare and is the only handwritten score I have to this day, and probably the only handwritten one I will ever do because I don't really believe in doing handwritten scores. This piece is called Discolored Blue because I was learning jazz theory at the time, and it's just a blues with a whole bunch of different chord substitutions in it, and I put it in a weird time signature because that's what Jacob Clodfelter does when he writes. He writes in weird time signatures because that's the music that he grew up listening to. From a theoretical standpoint, this piece is not that interesting. From a musical standpoint, it's not that interesting. But it was performed, and probably my favorite part of the recording of it is me cueing my friend Josue on drums by playing a tritone and octave tritone because that's his favorite interval, and so it was kind of my cue to him to say, hey, take your solo now. The next piece that I want to talk about is a really important piece to my undergraduate degree. At the time when I wrote it and when it was performed, I didn't really like it that much, and I still don't like it that much, but it's always been received really well, and not only was it performed at my community college when I wrote it, but it was also selected for the Society of Composers Incorporated Region 6 conference and got a performance there. And so because of that, I felt like I had to showcase it, and it was going to be on my recital, even though I wrote it during community college and not during my time at UTA. This piece is called 1013152-1911818. And yes, I had to read that directly off of the file name of the scores. No, I don't have it memorized. I never get that right. And even I know what it translates to. If you're curious, it actually just translates to Jacob-Sarah. At the time, I was dating my now wife, and we were studying numerology stuff in Music Theory 4, and so I decided to write with numerology and put all kinds of stuff in there. Now I say all kinds of stuff, but truth be told, I don't actually know how much I put in there. I think it's just simple things like birth dates and stuff I put into intervallic relationships. And if you are not a theory nerd and don't know what that means, don't worry about it. But the piece came out really pretty anyways, I think, and that numerology stuff is just in there for fun. And on the score, you'll see other things written with numbers at the top, at the title, which are important dates for our relationship and stuff like that. The version that you are listening to right now is the performance from the Society of Composers conference not the original one. Both recordings are great, but the one for the Society of Composers Conference was right at tempo, and the one at my community college was just a hair fast, which is actually kind of a feat because the ending part for the vibraphone player 1 is actually quite difficult. This piece was originally written for solo vibraphone, and I wrote every single part so that the player theoretically could be able to play everything. And I guess they can, but it would take a virtuosic player to be able to play both parts at the same time. So I ended up splitting it and have on the score written for solo or vibraphone duet. So if someone one day wants to record it by themselves, they totally can. But I found more success having two players, one on the bass part and one on the treble part. Fission is a piece that's very special to me because it's the first piece that I wrote under the study of Dr. Chave at UTA. This piece is the one that really pushed me, and it was this concept of following a Mozart form but using quartal and quintal harmony, and it had to be a duet between piano and some other instrument. I chose tenor saxophone because it's one of my favorite instruments, and I just think it's one of the most beautiful instruments there is. I'm really proud of this piece, and it was also selected for the Region 6 Society of Composers Conference. It's an important one in my history because it was the first one from UTA, and I just love everything about it, really. There's parts here and there, of course, that any composer will tell you that they would go back and change, and we know that composers of the past have a million different versions of their scores, and there are things in this score that I would change. But at the end of the day, this piece was an achievement for me, and I'm really glad that I got a recording of it, and I'm sad that I did not get another performance of it at my recital, which would have opened the concert, but I hope you enjoy the recording here. Sweet Pea. Let's talk about Sweet Pea. Choral music has been some of my favorites since starting my education at the collegiate level. I didn't get to dive into this area for a very long time. I believe it was about a year and a half of starting composition. So I was already at UTA before I started my first choral work, which actually ended up being Sweet Pea. But my struggle along the way was that choral music being so important to me is that I wanted it to be perfect. And it's not that I don't want any of my other music to be perfect, but I think that choral music is so special, and the ability to have lyrics that move people in the audience and bring them into new areas, it's so powerful, and it was important to me to get this right. And so I went through a bunch of different iterations and a bunch of different pieces that I'm sure I still have on my hard drive somewhere that are mostly religious texts or my own original text that has religious connotations. I believe that choral music is great at transferring spiritual ideas across to people. But as I went through a whole bunch of these ideas and working with Dr. Chave, none of them actually came out very well. And the one that he liked the most was Sweet Pea, which was my least favorite of all of the ideas. Not only was it my least favorite, but it was the only one that didn't have text that was spiritual. Sweet Pea is this cute little story and idea about my wife. Sweet Pea is a term that her father referred to her when she was younger, and so I decided to take that as a transition because me and my wife were married at the time, and take it as like a transition state, I suppose it's a pet name, right, of the transfer of father to giving his daughter to the husband, right? But the idea was it's just someone singing to a flower and showing them how much they care and love them, and they'll take them on the journey. And I always have this little picture when I was writing it of like a little boy having like a pot with a single flower in it, and he's just like walking around, adventuring somewhere, and he's carrying his little Sweet Pea with him. That's kind of the image I always had in my head when I was writing this. It's not super romantic. I mean, I think it was romantic that I wrote it for my wife, but it was never really intended to be that so much. This piece was recorded and performed by the Ambigua Voce choral ensemble, which I got to be a part of over the summer when it was recorded. Unfortunately, fun little fact, you will not hear my voice on the recording because I had a Terry meeting at the time. And so my wife is on the recording and 20-something other singers are all on the recording, but I am not. The next piece that I want to talk about, I'm only adding right here because of timeline reasons. I tried to keep the timeline consistent of what you're hearing of when I was writing it so you can hear my progression musically. And the recording that you are hearing right now is not an official recording. In fact, it's just a teaser of what's to come. I've had a lot of trouble trying to get this piece recorded. And so right now there is MIDI drums and MIDI bass because I've been waiting to get a drum track. Something else is an important piece because it was my sort of rebellion, but not really rebellion, against classical concert music. I had explained my frustrations to my teacher that I wanted to write jazz, fusion, rock, progressive music, right? That's what I grew up listening to. Progressive metal is my genre of choice. So I wanted to see if I could write something like that. To my surprise, my teacher totally let me write something like this and even explained new ideas and approaches about how to go through it. So Something Else is this piece that really is me, and it's called Something Else because it's something else different from all of my other compositions. It's jazz, fusion, rock, something for bass guitar, electric guitar, drum kit, tenor saxophone, and violin. What a weird ensemble. But I think the piece works really well, and it's probably my second favorite of all the pieces I've ever written. My favorite we'll talk about later. But this piece is truly special, and I hope one day you guys will get to hear the real thing. Keeping it chronologically, this next piece I wrote during the summer between my junior and senior year. This was through a program that was working with an ensemble called Mid-Cities Brass, and the idea was to write in a style that they commissioned for. So I got the weirdest one of all of them, circus music. How on earth do you write circus music? Well, I went through a bunch of different iterations with Haywire House, and it took me a while to figure out the form and figure out what the heck a French horn does in a brass ensemble. But I ended up figuring it out and making this sort of comedy piece where there's all sorts of mistakes. Something that I really like in my writing, and you'll find it a lot, is what I call gotcha moments. It's this idea of you keep hearing something over and over and over, but when you hear it later, it changes. It's one of my favorite things in music in general, and that probably comes from my background of liking progressive metal. It's the idea of the unexpected. I always want the unexpected. I believe I was taught at some point in my composition lessons that you generally should just never repeat anything exactly the same. And there's just no reason to, and I fully agree with that. And so I have taken that idea and made sure that my repeated sections in Haywire House are goofy. So you'll hear an A section and a B section that are pretty normal, but then you'll hear your A section return and it's super goofy and it's all messed up. And the trumpet players did a great job of making it sound like parts of this circus are falling apart all over the place. And then the B section, there's wrong notes. There are intentionally written sections where one person, it seems like they're getting lost in the music, but they're not. They're playing what I wrote. This piece occasionally still makes me laugh, and I hope it works that way for you as well. I'm going to skip chronological order now because the next piece chronologically that I wrote is the piece that would have ended my recital, and I want to talk about it at the end. Motion Sickness is a piece that you would have heard during my recital, but you do not get to hear right now because it simply just isn't being premiered or recorded anymore. This piece was a test for me to write a multi-movement work, to write something short, and to experiment with the electronics of Max MSP. So while you don't get to hear the piece, I figured it would be kind of fun to show you what the Max patch looks like. You'll see here on the screen that I have a menu set up for the performers to use live, and there's a few buttons to move them between movements, and they're color coded, and they have an on-screen metronome for the different tempos between the movements so that they can always be right on. But over here you'll see that we have all kinds of stuff going on behind the scenes, all these virtual wires running through things and connecting to stuff, where we have drum sounds and synth sounds and all kinds of neat stuff. During my undergraduate degree, I slowly started to realize that I wasn't learning the things that I wanted to learn. It was frustrating. Why are we spending so much time on theory and classical music that's hundreds of years old at this point, but not focusing on any of the modern technology? It's not that I didn't like theory. In fact, I've loved every theory class that I was in. I just felt so overwhelmed and uneducated about working with modern technology. Why aren't we being taught Pro Tools and Logic and Cubase? Why do I not know how to use VSTs? So I made it my mission to teach myself this type of stuff. And I just so happened to have a friend at the time who requested that I write music for his Dungeons & Dragons campaign. He had a few requests. I talked to the player characters about what they wanted. Currently you are listening to Drax the Dragonborn, which is not the first piece that I wrote digitally, but it is one that I think stands out among them. This process of writing music digitally in an audio workstation is totally different from any composition in school. And this stuff needs to be taught to musicians in music school. It is unacceptable that people are graduating with music degrees all the time and have no idea how to use something as simple as Audacity. They don't know how to record themselves. They don't know how to write digitally. I have a whole speech on this about how the music education system at the collegiate level is extremely flawed, and I'm using this video a little bit as a platform, but I won't go through the whole speech. Just know that it needs to change. The next piece that I wanted to talk about here is one that I wanted to showcase because it's my most recent piece for the Dungeons & Dragons campaign. This is for the villain in the story. His name is Arian. This piece was super fun because it has all sorts of dissonances and horror-esque moments going on throughout it. It uses the concept of tritones and minor seconds being the most dissonant intervals, and more modern sounds of reversed cymbals and stuff that you can't get in a live performance. This piece, I think, is a true showcase of my progress from the beginning of my undergraduate degree to now musically. I still feel very uneducated with this electronic composition stuff, but I am making it my goal because I am passionate about video games and film to write in this style from this point forward and teach myself everything that I need to know and potentially expand my education formally with this type of music. The last piece that I want to talk about is the piece that would have ended my recital. This piece is called Ex Nihilo. Finally, I was able to create a choral piece with the spiritual connection that I wanted. This piece was requested for the university singers to perform during their Christmas concert, and so I initially wrote it as Christmas music. I went back and forth a lot on how to make Christmas music that was wintry, but I felt obligated to make it spiritual because Christmas is not about winter, not about presents. And anyone watching this probably knows how much I love Christmas. But to me, it's really about the birth of Christ and everything that he did for us. So I went back and forth between trying to find texts or write my own texts. But in the end, I realized that if I'm going to write something that truly has a spiritual connection to it and is important and really represents Christ, I can't write it on my own. And so I just asked God that he would show me exactly what I was supposed to write. And I went to the Bible and I went to the Christmas stories in all of the Gospels, and I found one interesting version of the Christmas story, which is in the book of John. John begins with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God." Why does John begin the Christmas story with that, referencing Genesis? So I went back to Genesis and saw what Genesis had to say. Genesis says that in the beginning, the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of the Lord came over the earth and created the light. Well, in the New Testament, we find out that it was the Spirit of the Lord that impregnated Mary and created the light of Christ. And so I took this idea of the parallels of how the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the waters. Darkness was on the earth until light came. In the same way that there was darkness on the earth before our salvation through Christ, and there was darkness in us before our salvation through Christ. Ex Nihilo is about these parallels. About 2 hours after asking God to give me what he wanted to say, I had the full text complete. Ex Nihilo covers the parallels between both stories and tells the story in two different ways, but also the same way. You could read the text and see it as referencing either story. Ex Nihilo was set to be premiered and recorded at the Society of Composers National Conference, but unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 situation, there is no recording of it yet. I believe there will still be a recording in the future, but I wanted to end my recital and end my digital recital with this piece because this, I believe, is my magnum opus of composition. This piece is so important to me. It is everything that I want in music. I want music that glorifies God. I want music that moves people. And I want music with text and voices. And this piece utilizes everything that I've learned in composition up to this point. And I hope that it is performed one day for me to hear, for you to hear, and for the world to hear. Thank you for coming to my digital recital. You can find most of the pieces that I talked about here on my YouTube channel or on my website, jlclodfelter.com.